Daisy Clark had been in a coma for over a month when the doctor declared her dead. She was buried on a cool summer day in a small cemetery, about a mile from her home. "May she always rest in peace," her husband said. But that was not how it turned out. Late that night, a grave robber armed with a shovel and a flashlight began to dig her up. As the earth was still loose, he quickly reached the coffin and opened it. His hunch was right. Daisy had been buried wearing 2 valuable rings, a diamond wedding ring, and another studded with a brilliant ruby. The thief knelt down and reached inside the coffin to take the rings, but they were completely stuck on Daisy's fingers. He decided that the only way to get them was to cut off her fingers. But when he took out his knife and began to hack at the flesh, it began to bleed, and Daisy began to twitch. Suddenly, she sat up. Terrified, the thief scrambled to his feet, accidentally knocking his flashlight, which went out. In the dark, he could hear Daisy emerge from her grave. The thief stood frozen, clutching the knife in his hand. On seeing him there, Daisy covered herself with her shroud and asked, "Who are you?" Hearing her corpse speak, the grave robber ran. Daisy shrugged and kept walking, not bothering to look back. Seized by fear and confusion, the thief fled in the wrong direction and fell headfirst into the open grave onto his own knife. As Daisy walked home, the thief bled to death.
When I was a child, I lived on a street with a haunted house. A large and happy family had lived in the house, until one night when one of the children was playing with matches. The youngest boy of the family dropped a lit match on his bed, but was too scared to call out for help. The boy was burned alive under his covers. To add to the tragedy, his parents and 2 sisters died with him in the flames. One evening during a sleepover, my friends and I took turns trying to scare each other with ghost stories. It was approaching midnight, and unable to scare each other, we thought it would be fun to go to the haunted house in the dark. We walked through the gate together and up to what remained of the door, still set in its stone doorframe. The smell of smoke hung in the air, and thin clouds of ash were being blown in the breeze. But then we realized there was no breeze. Shapes began to form in the clouds of ash, and gray hands reached out from the shapes. As we turned to run, screams rose up out of the ashes. "Help us, we're burning," they cried. We started to run, thinking that as soon as we were clear of the house, we would be safe. But the ash shapes and screams followed us. As we neared my home, the smell of burning was almost overwhelming, and as we reached my door, I glanced over my shoulder to see a hand reaching for me. We piled through my front door, slamming it behind us, and ran up the stairs to my room, slamming that door tight as well. None of us expected to sleep, but the fear had exhausted us, and we fell into a deep slumber. The next morning in the daylight, we were all much braver. During breakfast, we talked about what happened and came to the conclusion that our imaginations had taken over. We decided to walk back to the house in the daylight. I opened my front door, and my mouth dropped in a silent scream. There on the door were 2 large round scorches high on the door, like someone had pounded on it with burning hands. Lower down, there were 2 smaller sets of handprints, as if children with burning hands had pushed against it. Finally, near the bottom of the door was a tiny set of burnt handprints, as if the youngest little boy had tried in vain to push open the door and get help for his family. I don't want to sound mean, but the dead are pretty clueless. I've always seen them. When I was younger, everyone thought I was just talking to imaginary friends. After a couple of years, when I overheard my parents talk about calling a psychologist, I realized what I was talking to. See, ghosts don't tend to realize they're dead, and they don't look like they do in the movies. They look just like us. I'm pretty smart for a 13-year-old, so I started noticing certain patterns to tell them apart from the living. They could be a bit distant from living people, or you'd see them try to talk to people who wouldn't even notice them. Some of them could tell I was different, that I noticed them. like this guy I saw after school yesterday. I'm a big boy now. I don't need my parents to pick me up. Home is just a short walk away. He was standing away from the other parents, didn't talk to them. He just stared at me. That's how I knew he was one of the ghosts. I went over, told him I knew what he was, and asked how I could help him. I don't remember much after that because of what happened this morning. Downstairs, my parents were crying. I tried talking to them, but they ignored me. They must have died last night somehow. Sometimes the new ghosts wouldn't talk to me. Some police officers and reporters just arrived. They won't talk to me either, just my parents. It's weird. I've never seen so many ghosts together before. Why won't anyone talk to me?